Hey, what's up everybody? I'd like to welcome you to another Juice tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to create these sliders where we're going to actually be able to do some FM and allow the user to control the frequency modulation and depth of their FM signal. So it'll sound something like this. Something like that. So yeah, we're going to get started right now. So before we do that, just wanted to remind you about our audio programming community and Discord. You can join us on the audioprogrammer.com/community. It's a great way to connect with other audio programmers and also to find out and help each other with all things audio programming. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to reset my repo here so we can start from the beginning. And here we go. I'm just going to load the Juce project here just to make sure we're loading the right version of our project. So currently what we have is, if we go to our plugin processor, we have these FM parameters that we've created, FM frequency and FM depth. And now what we need to do is we need to create those parameters in our Oscillator component class. So we need to create some sliders, some attachments, and some labels for each one of these parameters. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to also need to bring in the data for the oscillator parameters, and we're going to need to adjust our constructor, which means that we're going to need to do that in the plugin editor where we're actually declaring our oscillator. So how are we going to do all that? Well, first thing, let's start simple. First thing that we'll do is we will just create some sliders. So I'll create two sliders, and I will call them FM frequency slider, FM freak slider, FM depth slider. So Juce slider, FM freak slider, and Juce slider, FM depth slider. I'm going to show you a little secret as well that I've learned recently. I wouldn't say it's a secret, but it's something that's actually helped me out quite a bit. So let's just take the frequency slider and let's just do this slider and do the things that we need to do for it. So we got Juce. So we're going to make a slider attachment so that we're able to attach the parameter from the plugin processor to the slider. And so I've covered that in previous tutorials, and I don't want to spend too much time on going through that again. So we got the Juce audio processor value tree state slider attachment. This is what's going to attach our slider to the parameter that's living in our audio processor value tree state. And we will just call this FM freak attachment. And we will also create a label. So the label was the bit of text that we saw above the slider itself. So the user wants to modify a parameter, they should need to know what they're actually modifying. So we will do that with Juce label, and I will call this FM freak label. Can't spell today. And let's just pull up our API really quick, and we will go here to the label class, and we will see that the label takes two arguments for its constructor. So this is easily confusable. You have one string that's a component name, so that's the name if you need to refer to it in code for something later. And then you have the label text, which is what the user actually sees on the user interface. So we can just initialize that right now, and I will just call these the same thing. I'll call it FM freak like this, and then we just repeat this again, FM freak, And now we have that initialized. Great. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to set a slider style for this. So we will say FM Freak slider set slider style. And then we just have to set the slider style. I've shown you how to do this in previous tutorials. So we got Juce, slider, slider style. We will make these linear, rotary. So we'll make these rotary, horizontal, vertical drag, like that. And I think that's everything I need for that. And let's see, we can also set the text box, so that'll be the box that will show the value of the actual slider. And we will do set text box style. So we saw that the text box was below, so below our slider. So we'll do that now. So we got Juce, slider, and then this is text box below. And we'll make this read only. So we'll just make this true. And then these are some values that I kind of figured out from experimenting before. So we will do them as 50 and 25. So did quite a bit of experimenting with this before. And then we have to make these visible as well. So we got add and make visible. And then FM Freak slider. And then we have to do the attachment. So we will do this attachment, which is called FM Freak attachment. And I will just copy all of this because I'm going to need this in just a second. And we will, since this is memory that we're doing as a unique pointer, we have to use make unique. So we got FM Freak attachment equals stood make unique. And then we will paste all of this business in there. And then what we have is the slider attachment class. So I'd like to show where I'm actually getting all this from. And we see that we need 3 arguments to initialize a slider attachment. We need the audio processor value tree state to use, the parameter ID that's coming from our audio processor value tree state, and the slider that we're going to attach it to. So the audio processor value tree state is simple. That's this, the APVTS. We did this in the last tutorial. And now we run into a little bit of a situation. So we have the next parameter, which is the parameter ID that's going to come from the audio processor value tree state. Now what we could do if we wanted to is we could go, I'm just going to open up a separate tab here and go to our plugin processor where all of our parameters are at. And I could just put this OSC OSC1 FM Freak. The problem is, what if I want 2 oscillators? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to make this extendable so in the future, if I wanted to create more than one oscillator, that each one of those oscillators is going to have its own FM frequency and FM depth, right? So if I created a second oscillator, it would have 2 separate parameters called OSC2 FM Freak, OSC2 FM depth. And because of that, what I want to do is I want to make sure I pass those in through the constructor so that I can create as many oscillators as I want and that it's extendable later on, right? So if I only put the parameter ID in here, then that means I'd only be able to use that parameter ID. That's not very useful to me. So because of that, I need to extend the arguments in my constructor here. So what I will do is I will make another string here, which will be our FM frequency ID. And while I'm here, I will do the depth ID as well, because we're going to need that a little bit later. And then we will need to just update our constructor in our header file like so. And then we are actually creating this in our plugin editor, which means that we need to go to our editor and we need to update that as well. So here's where we're actually creating the oscillator. And we see that we've already given it the parameter wave type, which is the wave type selector. And now I just need to give it those parameters that I was talking about earlier. So OSC1 FM freak and OSC1 FM depth. So there we go. So there's the frequency, and here's the depth. Like that. Make sure we get rid of this extra quote. And now we should be fine. I'm just going to make sure that I actually got that right. So make sure that you got frequency and depth in the right order. Okay, so don't mix those up. Just going to compile this very quickly and make sure that we are okay so far. Oh, it's not going to compile because we haven't actually passed in the rest of our arguments here. So going to why we did all of that, we need to pass in that FM frequency ID to connect it with our FM frequency slider. So we got FM freak ID like that. And then we just need to connect that to the slider, which is FM freak slider. And there we go. So now we're just going to build this and see how we're doing it so far. So great. So that succeeded. And what you will find is that there's nothing there, right? So we don't have our sliders or anything there because we need to do a few more things. So another thing that we have is we have our label. So our label is that bit of text that we saw that identified what the parameter is. And so what we're going to do is we will say we will have to do an add and make visible, and this will be FM freak label. And here we have, so let's go to our label class here just in case you're getting started so you can walk through this with me. So we have the label class, which is just a bit of text that we can do, and we can do all kinds of really cool stuff with this, but we're just going to keep it keep it simple for now. So first thing that we'll do is we will set the font size. So good idea just to set the font size. We want to set the font color as well. So what I could do is I could say FM freak label set color. This allows me to go into the color of the different elements here. So let me just show you. So you have these color IDs, and you can set the background, you can set the text color, the outline color, and so on. Just for now, we're just going to set the text color to white. Make sure that that text is white and that we can actually see it. And to do that, once again, we need to go into the label class, into the color IDs. So Juce, label, color IDs, and then, oh, I didn't actually tell it what I wanted, and it will be text color ID. And then we just set the color, Juce, colors, and then this will be white. Also, I'm going to set the justification type to make sure that the label is actually in the center, so it's actually centered in the space around it. So Juce have done a really good job of making this really easy once you get the hang of it. So you got set justification type, and so you could say I think you can just say Juce justification centered like that, and we will set the font size. So I will just do that here, even though it doesn't really make a difference. Frequency label, set font. So in here you can actually set the font itself, what font you want, or you can set the font size. So in this one I set it to 15 like that. So 15 pixels high. And so now I think we're good there. So that's all of our stuff that we need for the label. And then once again, we've set the label name FM Freak in the constructor. So those are just our default constructor arguments. So now we're ready to do some drawing here. So let's do the slider first, because what we're going to do is we're going to draw the slider, and then we want to draw the label relative to where the slider is. But if we drew the label first, the label wouldn't know where the slider position is. So that's why we got to draw the slider first. Yeah, and I'll show you what I mean. So we got FM slider, FM Freak slider, not that, FM Freak slider, set bounds. And these are just some numbers that I picked out after some experimentation. So this one will just start on the x-axis at 0, and then the y-axis will be 80, and then the width of this will be 100, and then the height of it will be 90. Okay, like that. And now what I can do is I can actually make it where the FM label, the FM frequency label, is relative to where the frequency slider is. So I could say FM freak label, because trust me, and I say this from a lot of experience, you can actually spend a lot of time trying to get it centered and trying to get it right, and it takes a while. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the bounds to the same x position as the frequency slider. So that's why I'm putting this after the slider. So we go FM Freak slider, and you have this nice handy function called get x, which gets the x coordinate of the component of the x position of the frequency slider. And then what I want to do is I want to put this label above the slider. Okay, and to do that, we are going to once again get our FM frequency slider, and then we will get the Y position, so get the top of the slider, and then we will just subtract a little bit just to actually give it a little bit of room, so that the text isn't actually on top of the slider. And then we're going to give it the width of the slider itself. So the label, the potential space that we'll have for the label will be as wide as the FM frequency, the slider itself. This is pretty important because we set the justification of the label of the text to be centered. So in order for it to be centered on the slider, we have to make the width of it the same as the slider. Okay, so that's why we will say FM Freak slider get width. And then the height of this, we will just make 20 pixels high. Okay, so let's see if that works. I feel like I'm missing something, but yeah, let's see. Yeah, I am missing something. So at the moment, we're not seeing anything new, right? So you might be saying, well, what's happening? Why is that happening? So as you can see, we have this situation where our frequency slider is 80 pixels down on the y-axis. Now, if we go to our plugin editor, where we're actually drawing this whole oscillator with the oscillator selection box and everything, when we go there, we see that the bounds that we've given it for the whole oscillator is just 100 pixels by 30 pixels. So we have this. So this is only 30 pixels on the y-axis, but we're actually drawing our slider 80 pixels down. Well, that's not very good because it's not actually going to show the box. And sometimes, like, I'll show you what I mean here, right? So if I do this, g.draw rect, I'm just going to draw a white rectangle around the bounds of the whole component, and you'll see what I mean here. So we could say get local bounds, I believe, and I'm just going to set the color to white. So G set color, not solar, set color, and Juice colors. This'll actually drive you wild if you're just starting out with Juice and you're not really aware of why this is happening. So I'm just going to show you because it's took me a lot of time to learn. So we can see here. So what I've done is I've created a white rectangle that goes around the entire bounds of the component. We can see that it doesn't actually give any room for us. The size of this component isn't actually giving us room to draw our frequency or depth slider, right? So what we need to do is we actually need to just make that space a little bit bigger, right? So I can do this, and I actually do this a lot. I actually draw a rectangle around the component so I can make sure that I'm sizing them correctly. And so let's make this 200, and then let's make this 200. Yeah, why not? So let's try that now. And we're building. And now we see, okay, like if this, we see that we've actually drawn the rectangle much larger, and now we actually see our frequency slider, right? So now it's here. We see that our space now is running into where the ADSR is now. And that's not a big deal because we're not really, I'm going to just make this 150. If I make this 150, then we should be fine. So there we go. I'll make it 175 just so we have room for the FM depth slider, which we're going to draw to the right of this. But I'll make it 180 there. Be quick about it. But now you can see that we actually see the slider. We actually see the FM frequency slider. So that's what we've done there. And yeah, so now we're good, right? And we see that we're in a bounds where we're not going to be running into the ADSR. We'll go back and we'll draw this later. Okay, so another little tweak that we can do while we're here is we saw that it started off at 5. We want this to start off at 0. We also see that we have this 0.000 ... We want to just maybe make this like 2 decimal places, right? We don't want this to be we don't want it to look like this. So there's a really cool way that we could do this, and I'm going to show you something else while we're actually there. So we'll see that we're going, now we have 0 on the left hand side, we have 1000 on the right hand side, we have 500 hertz at the very center, and we can actually skew this where what we want to do, sometimes you can get with FM, you can get like really good really interesting sounds just here in this range where you're going between maybe 20, 30 hertz. And maybe I want that to cover, that lower range to cover more of what this slider is. And maybe what I want this center to maybe be something more like 800 or something like that. So I can actually do that. And I'm going to show you how to do that here in the parameters. So you actually have 2 optional arguments that you can make in this normalizable range. So if we go to the documentation here and I go normalizable range, we have a couple different types of constructors that we can call here. So you have this one that is range start, range end, which is the one that we're currently using. And now you have this third argument that says interval value. So one of the very common questions that we get in our community is, well, what if I just want that? What if I want this parameter just to have 2 decimal places? What I can do is I can actually set another argument. So this is a third argument where I could say, I want this parameter to actually increment by 0.01. So like by hundredths rather than by that whatever range we had it before. So I'm going to do that for both FM frequency and FM depth, like that. And then we have this other one called Skew Factor, right? Where what you can do is actually do what I was talking about before, where you can give the lower range more of the slider, and then actually just kind of change the ranges of how the slider values are distributed amongst the slider. This is very useful for stuff like filters and things like that, where you want to have a lot of control in the lower amount of that range. And so what I'll do is I will set this to 0.3, and I will do that for this one as well. And one thing about this is that in the documentation, I don't think that they actually say enough about this skew factor. What you have to do is you have to actually look in the actual code itself. So if I do jump the definition in normalizable range, you actually have to scroll down a little bit to find it. So this is something that I've shown a couple people in the past. So you see the skew factor, but it doesn't really let you know in the documentation here what that actually means. But if you scroll down a little bit further, hopefully I can find this. Here we go. So down here on line 222, you see this little thing that says skew factor lets you skew the mapping logarithmically. And it says a factor that is less than, if the factor is less than 1, the lower end will have more of the slider's length, which is what we want in this case. So that's the reason why I'm going with 0.3, because I want the lower range of those values to have more of the slider, more of the room on the slider. Okay, so you'll see what I mean when I actually build this again. So now when I just build this again, let's have a look. And what you'll see now is that it starts at 5. I need to change that so that's actually starting at 0. And then if I go to the middle value, you see that the middle value here is no longer 500. It's actually something more like 94. So that means that I've got that. And then if I go past the middle, now you'll see that it goes 94 to 1000, right? Like that. So you got 100 values that are distributed through the first half of the slider, and then you have the other 900 values that are distributed through the second half. So I've done that so I can have more control on that lower end range and get these interesting sounds. So now I'm just going to change the defaults to 0 and 0. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back. So I'm going to show you this little trick that I learned, which really has saved me a lot of time as I build these things. So as you can see, we have this other slider that we need to draw, the FM depth slider, and we need to do the attachment, and we need to do the label. And then what we need to do is we need to do all this stuff again. Set the slider style, set the text box style, make it visible, do all of this. Point is that that's a lot of repeating of what we're doing, because we know that the relativity of this slider is going to be basically the same as the first slider that we drew. So rather than do all of that, I'm going to save myself some time, and this is especially helpful if I want to do loads of sliders. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a method just in here. Let's see, what will we call it? We'll call it void, we'll call it set slider with label, maybe. And let's give it some, we'll give it some arguments. So basically what I want to do is I want this method to do all of these things for me, so I don't have to type all of this business again or every time, especially if I'm making a whole bunch of this, these sliders, and they're all going to be the same throughout the plugin. So first thing that it needs to know about is the FM, the FM slider, right? So this is going to have to be Juce slider, and we don't want to make a copy of it. We want a reference to it. So that's why I'm doing the reference. So it'll be Juce slider and slider. And then what we will do is we need to know about the label. So we will say Juce label and label. And then it will need to know about our slider attachment. So we'll do that. And this will be a reference and attachment. And then what else does it need to know? So I think that that's everything. So now I can just close this out. Okay. And now I just need to actually write this function. All right, and you're going to see how handy this is. This is something that, I mean, it feels like something that should be quite obvious, but it's something that didn't dawn on me until recently, actually. So now I have this function, and I know what you're thinking. Okay, what are you going to do with this, right? So actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all of this business, I'm just going to copy it for the moment, and I'm actually going to paste it in here. So now all I need to do is so we see that we need a couple more pieces of information here already, right? So we see that it doesn't know about our audio processor value tree state or our parameter ID, and we're going to need to add those to our arguments to pass these in. So now I'm just going to make this generic. We have a slider, so now I'm going to just say slider here rather than this particular slider. So there we go. I'm going to make this slider visible. And then now I need to add my audio processor value tree state and my ID to this to the list here. So I will just put this here. So we will say Juce audio processor value tree state reference. So like this. I'll put this as the third argument here. APVTS. And then we need a Juce string. And this will be param ID. Like that. So now that I got all of this, this is getting a little bit, you can see that this is getting a little bit long to read. It's not too bad. But what I could do is I could do something like this using attachment equals, it's mainly stuff like this business that makes it look really long. So I will do that, and you've seen me do this in previous tutorials like that. So that makes it look a little bit cleaner. I like doing that. And then you got to make sure you do that in the CPP as well, like this. This makes it, in my opinion, much easier to read. Like that. Great. So now we just need to change this FM Freak ID to Param ID, like that. So this is just kind of templating or making a generic function, because we're going to be doing all this same stuff, setting the same font and everything as for our second slider as the first slider. And if we needed to make 10 more of these, imagine needing to type all of that out 10 more times. It's much easier to do this. Just make a function where we will say set slider with label. And I love stuff like this. This is quite exciting to me, where you say, okay, now we will pass in our slider, FM Freak slider, FM Freak label, and then APVTS, and then the parameter ID, which is FM freak ID, and then our attachment, which is FM freak attachment. And this is the part that I love right here, because now what I could do is I could take all this stuff that looks like, you know, a bunch of stuff. I could just go boom like that, and now that should work. So let's see if that actually worked. Okay, it's building, and there it is. So we see that we've done that, and that's when we need to do that 10 more times. We can just use that same. We can just do that same thing, right? So, and there's another thing. There's another thing that we can actually do here. Let me think about this, because I'm doing this on the fly. I'm not gonna do it. But what I could do, or what I would do normally, is I would actually do a component that would include the slider and the label together, so that what it would do is I could say this is a slider with label, and then set the bounds once, and it would do both the slider and the label. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that for now, but it'll be a good exercise for you to give a try. So now we just need to do this same thing for the frequency depth. So first thing that we need to do is, I'm actually going to take this, I'm going to put this above like this, so that I can now use that here as well. Because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another unique pointer attachment, and this will be FM depth attachment like that, and we will make another label, Juce label, FM depth label, and this will be FM depth like that, and FM depth. Okay, and let's see, we made the slider already. So we made the slider, we made the attachment, we've made the label. And so now watch how easy this is, right? So now I could say set slider with label, and then we just put in FM depth label, or FM depth slider, FM depth label, APVTS, FM depth ID, and FM freak attachment. See, much easier than having to write all of that all over again, right? So now, once again, I could do this same type of thing where I subclass component and put a frequency, put a label and a slider together, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to just do this very quickly right now. So set bounds. Now what I'm going to do is I want to draw this to the right of the frequency slider, and so what I could do is I could once again use the position of the other slider to show where I want to set this slider. So we could do FM depth, or FM freak slider, and they have this function called get right, which gets the right edge of the other slider. And then for the Y, we would do 80, which will be the same as the frequency slider. And then for width, what we need to do is we will do 100. And then for the height, we will do 90. And then we will do FM depth label, set bounds. And then it'll be something similar to what we have on line 42. So we got FM depth slider dot get X, and then FM depth slider dot get Y minus 20, And then once again, we will make the width of this the same as our slider, so that when we do this, it will be the same width and everything will be centered and nice and neat. And we will do 20. So this is cool. I can make this a little bit better even. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do const auto, let's see, we will do slider width equals 100. And then here I will do slider width. And here I'll do slider width. So once again, when I have a bunch of these, I don't want to change this. I don't want to go back and change this a whole bunch of times. And if I have individual numbers there, it'll just take me forever to change it. So now I'm just making it so this is extendable. So now we could do slider height, and this makes it much easier and much less intimidating to look at when you're actually going through this code. Oh, this needs this. And so, you know, this could go as far as you want, really. So I would say label Y offset equals 20. So I could say label Y offset and then we will do a label height, const auto label height equals 20. So label height, label height. And I will do one more. I will do one more even, which will be const auto slider pos y equals 80. Slider pos y and slider pos y. So this gets rid of what we call the magic numbers, and that looks much easier to me to read than a whole bunch of just random numbers lying around. So let's see if we actually drew this thing the way that we've intended. So here we go, and then once we do this, then we should be ready to test. So we see that we've done this, except we have a couple problems. We see that our FM depth label hasn't shown up for one reason or another, and we see that we have these this dot 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 that we don't want. Okay, so let's just have a look and investigate what that's about. So let's see here. So I think maybe I've done something wrong here. So we have FM depth slider get X, FM depth slider get Y minus label offset, get width, and label height. So that seems to be fine. What is happening here? FM depth label. Oh, this should be FM depth attachment. Okay. So, oh, there it is. So we have FM freak label that we've made visible. What we want here is just the generic label like that. So we will compile this. And so now we have FM depth. It's not centered, which is interesting. I'm not sure why that's happening. I think maybe I've done my calculation wrong. So let's see here. So we got FM depth slider get width, get Y, that's label offset. We got, oh, once again, I need to do, this is label, sorry. Yeah, this is the only thing, is that you got to make sure that you actually set these to the generic values rather than the values that they were before. So just making sure that we actually have all of that. Okay, and then while I'm at it, I'm just going to go back to the plugin processor, and yeah, I think we'll be fine now. So we're going to try that. Okay, so there we go. Oh, one thing is FM depth. This still isn't quite right. So let's have a look here. So the FM depth looks fine. It's something that I've done in the slider class itself. So one moment. So we've got FM depth slider, FM depth label, APVTS, frequency, and depth ID. So this would be getting it from the depth ID. So why is that not working? So we've got slider, 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 attachment. Oh, here we go. Once again, yeah, this is what happens when you move stuff around like this. So this should just be slider. And now we're going through. And now we are good. Great. So now we're going to test this out, and you will see that we're going to have an error, but I've thought that it might be helpful to show you this error just so you can see it and see why it's happening and what we need to do. So yeah, so let's go here, and then we'll go to tap synth, and now I'm just going to play a sound. So I'm just going to turn this down a little bit. So we're playing. So there we go. That's what I wanted to happen. So we see that we have this assertion that happened where it says increment can't run this value backwards. Now if we look down in our debugger or our inspector, is it inspector or debugger, that we have a negative value to our increment. So basically it's trying to go backwards. Why is this happening? If we step back on our call stack, we will see that this is actually happening on our process method. And then what we need to do, so the reason that this is happening is because we have this frequency modulation, which is a wave that's going, so we have it going from between 0 and 1,000 hertz, right? So it's a huge wave. Now the problem is that we can see here that if we're getting our last MIDI note, so let's say this is 440 hertz, and then we're adding it with whatever our frequency modulation wave is, and we can see that this is 994, negative 994 hertz. We can see that that's not going to be good because that's going to be a negative frequency, which would not be very good. So what we could do, so the way that I did this before is I actually set it to where if the FM mod was, where if the result of this was negative, that I just set it to 0. But now I'm starting to think that if maybe what I could do is I could flip it around and make it positive, make it the positive value. I don't know if this is going to work. This is something that I just thought of. So let's say we set a value that says auto current frequency, current freq equals this, right? And then maybe what we could say is we could check to see if the current frequency is greater than 0, greater than or equal to 0. And if it is, then we will just do the current frequency. And if not, then what we could do is we just multiply it by -1. So let's see, is this going to be, so this is going to be a float. So we need to make sure that it is, it's 1.0 rather than 1. And that we could just multiply it just to flip it, just to flip the wave around to make sure that we're still in the positive. So let's try that. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but let's try it. So else current frequency times -1, 1.0, like that. So I'm just going to try that, see if that works. Because what was happening before is if I was setting it just to 0, as I was turning it, it was getting these, and you might have noticed it when we were doing it at the very beginning of the tutorial, that it was getting these kind of starts and these kind of jumps, which wasn't, which is okay, I guess, if you're just prototyping, but I'm sure that we can do better. So now, here we go. Just going to turn this down a little bit. Let's make it a sine wave or a sol wave, and let's turn it down an octave or two. Pretty good. Doesn't feel like we're getting those jumps either that we were seeing at the very beginning of the tutorial. Now I'll just go back and I'll actually just get rid of this white box so so it looks a little bit better. It's still not a very organized. Actually, I'll just leave it there for now because we'll come back to it and we'll actually set those components up a little bit nicer. But I hope that that was a helpful tutorial for you and that helps you out, especially with components. There can be a lot of code that goes into actually making these components, and if you can actually abstract some of that out a bit and make those where now what we can do is we can eventually make it where all of our sliders with our labels are actually the same size, same positioning, same everything, and I find that that saves me a lot of time, and I hope that it does for you as well. If you found that video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.